The Little Ship Club Tuesday evening talk, which is about a famous lifeboat that was stationed in Guernsey, and we're going to hear about some of the rescues and the restoration of this wonderful boat, which is currently located in St Catherine's and can be visited there. So it's my pleasure to welcome Colin Trowles, who's going to talk about this amazing project and the restoration and his involvement with the RNLI. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to come on to talk to you this evening. It's great to be back here. So back in 2018, I had my wedding reception and 50th birthday party next door. So I'm a little bit more sober than I was in that. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you tonight about a project that's very close to my heart. That's the RNLI is very close to my heart. I'll talk for about an hour. I'm happy to take questions throughout the evening and at the end as well. I've got a little video to show you to start with. But it's all about one particular lifeboat. And when we have people come on board and I give them the tour, the first thing I point out to them, what do you understand the 5202 to mean? Does everybody know?
The second boat of the class 52?
Absolutely right, yeah. She's 52 foot in length, and she was the second one to be built with 46. And the RNLI always put their fleet numbers on the side of the boat. I was just saying to Barry, about 20 years ago they went metric, the RNLI went metric, so now when you see like modern day lifeboats, they have the numbers but all being metric. She's the second one of the Arran class to be built, that is 52 foot long. So if I just play this little video.
The Sir William Arnold lifeboat is one of the most iconic and distinctive looking lifeboats the RNLI has ever had in its fleet. Unique in many ways, this Arran class vessel was to have a distinguished life-saving career covering 3 decades and saving 223 lives. In the 1970s, the RNLI were developing a new, faster class of lifeboat to replace the traditional 8-knot lifeboats. The island of Guernsey had been fundraising for their new lifeboat, the second Arran class to be built at Osborne's shipyard in Littlehampton. The fundraising campaign, led by the local RNLI branch, raised over £50,000 towards the cost of the new boat, £130,000 in 1973. Vice President of the branch was Guernsey bailiff Sir William Arnold, but sadly he died suddenly before his 70th birthday and never got to see the boat named in his memory. When the Sir William Arnold was named by Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Kent in May 1973, little did anyone know that this lifeboat was to go on to be involved in one of the most famous rescues in RNLI history 7 years later. In December 1981, the Ecuadorian cargo vessel Bonita had been hit by several large waves and began to develop a 45-degree list out in the English Channel. In force 12 gale, blizzard and near darkness, the lifeboat with coxswain Mike Scales at the helm rescued 29 people in horrendous conditions. The RNLI awarded their gold medal to the coxswain and bronze medals to the other 7 crew. But that rescue wouldn't be the end of this amazing vessel's life-saving career. 3 years later, and described by the coxswain as similar, if not worse than the Bonita, they would rescue 9 from the sinking Radiant Med. That rescue would earn a bronze medal from Mike Scales. A silver would follow 8 years later for coxswain Peter Bisson in a dramatic rescue from the yacht Sirasiuria. The Sir William Arnold was much loved and respected by all her crews, and it was a sad day for the island of Guernsey when she sailed to the mainland to be sold out of service and an unknown future.
Should play, should continue to play. Fingers crossed. That's there again, maybe not. No, okay, right, so I think I can pick it up from there. So why is the Sir William Arnold so special? which is a unique one-off design. I mentioned she was 46 boats of this particular class built. She was the second one, and she was a prototype. And from that design, the RNO went on to develop the Arran class lifeboat. And the design, the areas they took from that particular design are used in modern day lifeboat design. She's the second one to be built in wood. They built 3 in wood with an aluminium wheelhouse, and then they went over to fiberglass. And the last one they built was built with steel. The RNO were experimenting with steel. When she went to the fleet in 1973, she was the fastest lifeboat in the whole of the lifeboat service, capable of doing 19.5 knots. So she really was a fast craft. But she wasn't the first fastest lifeboat in the RNI's history. Does anybody know where the first fastest lifeboat was stationed? Yeah. No, even before then. Yeah. I think it was back maybe in the 1930s. The Dover had a fast boat that was capable of doing about 30 knots. It took a bit of a while to get that speed going. It wasn't a planing craft, but that was the first fastest boat in the fleet. And why is she another reason why she's special? She probably earned the cruise the most gallantry medals in the history of the RNLI as well. 15 gallantry medals in total. And she was the first lifeboat in the UK to have a chart plotter. Really important. Because before then it was just Decker Navigator. So 15 gallantry medals, 1 gold, 1 silver, 13 bronze. Pretty impressive record, to be honest. I'm really proud to be able to own that boat and been on the journey since I've owned it, which we'll look at. So she served all the time at St Peterport in Guernsey, an area which I had no involvement with until I actually bought the boat. She was really loved and respected by the crews there. And when she retired in 1997, the crews didn't want to give her up. She was replaced by a 7th-class lifeboat, and they wanted to have the 2 running together, which obviously the RNI weren't going to do. But they were very sorry to see the Sir William Arnold go. Why were they so sorry? Because it was such a safe and dependable boat. She'd been knocked in the beam ends a couple of times in service, never capsized. She was self-righting, but thankfully never had to use those facilities. So she was retired in 97, went off to an unknown future, as you heard the video say. And lifeboats tend to have a shelf life of about 25 years, in which case they're then sold into service, they're sold out of service to private owners and lifeboat enthusiasts such as myself, who just happen to have quite a lot of my £1,000 money in the bank not being used. So I purchased her in October 2019. Looking rather sorry for herself. She was up in Blythe in Northumberland, and she'd been used as a private independent lifeboat by a group of volunteers who were running an independent lifeboat service up in Blythe. Because what the RNI tend to do, now every 5 years or so, they have a coastal review. So they look at what lifeboat stations have been used around the coast, decide, okay, we've got a fast lifeboat there, let's withdraw a big boat, put an inshore boat. So they're constantly reviewing the cover around the UK. Some stations, some areas like to have their big lifeboats, and so they set up an independent lifeboat organisation, independent charity, and they become a declared facility to HM Coast Guard. Unfortunately, they weren't that successful, so they ceased operating, and the Sir William Arnold, which was called slightly differently then, was the asset, and I purchased that. As you can see, she'd had a number of private owners before I came along, so a lot of the superstructure had been removed, sadly, and she was just looking a bit forlorn until I turned along. So, why me and why this boat? Well, I had no boating background whatsoever. Guess which one is me? I'm the one with the mouth open, waiting for dinner. One of 3 brothers. None of my family went to boating whatsoever. So what got me interested? Well, it was a primary school project. I was about 7 or 8 years old. We did a primary school project in the lifeboat service, and something just clicked. And one of my first books that my parents got me was a book by Sir Johnny called about Henry Blogg, the famous promo lifeboat coxswain. But Ladybird books were very influential in my growing up era. And when my parents used to go along to parents' evening, as teachers always used to say, Colin, he doesn't like his reading, but please try and encourage him to read books other than just on lifeboats. I went to my parents and said, well, as long as he's reading, that's fine. So yeah, I did start building up my lifeboat book collection about that sort of age. Now, why have I got a picture of Kevin Keegan? Well, children of my age, boys of my age, we had idols. Kevin Keegan, Trevor Francis, all the era. No, mine wasn't football players. Who were mine? Henry Blogg of Cromer, and Brian Bevan of Humber. Does anybody know anything about the Humber station and what was unique about it? Yes, sir.
I think it was the only station that had professional lifeboat.
Absolutely right. Yep, it was the only station up until the Thames was opened to have full-time lifeboat crew living on the island with their families as well. They had 7 houses, and there'd be 7 on the crew. 6 would be on, 1 would be off, etc. Brian Bevan, excuse me, was a superintendent coxswain, and he still holds the record of winning a gold, silver, and a bronze medal, all awarded at the same award ceremony. So those awards have never been matched. But yeah, so they were my idols that I looked up to. And I grew up a bit of a lifeboat enthusiast. All our holidays were lifeboat orientated, of course they were. We'd go to Sheringham, we'd go to Cromer, go to Lowestoft, etc. We'd been to a theatre at Lowestoft, and we just got back, just getting ready for bed, and my parents said, "Did you hear that, Colin? There was some Maroons." Was it? That's because my father drew me down to the quay, drew me down to the harbour, when Lowestoft was a Buston fishing harbour, and so I could see the lifeboat disappear out until the steam light just completely disappeared. So that was my childhood. And so as the book collection increased, this boat suddenly started appearing. Because remember, it was fastest in the fleet, so it was somewhat of the darling of the institution. It was featuring in a lot of publications at the time. These are the books my parents were getting, so no connection. But you can see where that picture was taken. That was in 1973. Another book by Patrick Howarth was The Lifeboat Service. Inside front cover was the lifeboat again. So I started to register, oh yeah, that's the Sir William Arnold, even at that small age. That boat's St. People, Guernsey. So I knew that unique, odd-looking lifeboat, because the designs were changing, was in Guernsey. And then I'd quite a lot of time off at school through illness. So spent a lot of time at home, and my parents got me this board game, which was fantastic in the late 70s. And guess which lifeboat featured on the front cover? There's a bit of a pattern forming here, isn't there? That's the one I'd suddenly would end up owning the lifeboat. But I knew I wanted to be a lifeboatman from a very small age. But I knew it was voluntary, I had to get a full-time job. So this is me at West Mersey getting involved in the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. This is quite a long presentation, so I'm going to flick through some of the slides, so one, I don't bore you, so you don't look forward to your dinner. 2, so I can get the key messages out. And used to go along to the awards ceremony, not too far away at the Royal Festival Hall. The Honour and I would hold their presentation of awards, annual general meeting at the Festival Hall, and I would go along, because I used to belong to the local fundraising branch, I still do, 40 years later. And one particular year, an award was issued to, award was awarded to Captain Peter Bisson for a rescue to the Matan 2, a yacht, which was being battered around in a force 9 off Guernsey. Again, this is that lifeboat that I now own. That's Peter Bisson. Peter's son, Carl, is the current mechanic of the current Sir William lifeboat. So I fulfilled my ambition, 2001. Become a crew member and then helmsman at Hayling Island. And then when the RLI started introducing competency-based training, I became a trainer assessor on inshore lifeboats, travel around the east coast and the south coast. So the Solent and the North Sea were my training grounds, really. This is me after I come back from a mud rescue. I was a dog handler in the police, so this is a publicity photograph with my police dog prior to embarking on the London Marathon. And then an RYA instructor. So, coming on to the main thing, why you've come along to listen to me tonight. Why was the Sir William Arnold built, and why the RNI decided to build modern day lifeboats? Well, does anybody know which boat that is? I'd like to hazard a guess. Quite poignant. It's the ill-fated Penley lifeboat, Solomon Brown, which was sadly lost in 1981. She was a 47-foot Watson class, twin-engined, wooden, with twin diesel engines, but only capable of doing 8 knots. And around the late 60s, early 70s, they were the stalwarts of the RLI fleet. So the RLI were trying to replace their boats with much faster, more efficient boats. So they went different ways to developing that. The 37-foot Oakley class was the first self-righting designed lifeboat, which achieved its self-righting capability by shifting water ballast in 2 tanks. Capsized one side, water ballast was transferred to the other tank, and it righted itself. They also went to America, and they bought over a 44-foot steel lifeboat for evaluation trials. That went around the coast of the UK. The UK volunteer crews loved it, and so the RNI embarked on a building programme. The first couple of these boats were built in Lowestoft. Does anybody know the name of this class of lifeboat? The RLI have a policy of naming their lifeboats after UK rivers. So because Lowestoft lies on the River Waveney, it became the Waveney class. And the Arun became the Arun class because it was built in Littlehampton. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And they still call lifeboats after, they still call the class of lifeboats after UK rivers. But one of my most common questions is, but it's named after an individual person. So how does that work? Well, that's who the lifeboat's been bequeathed to, or the benefactors provided with this. So that's the Waveney class. It changed over the years, went from white superstructure to orange. And in the 70s, the RLI started looking at cruising lifeboats. A lot of the Scandinavian countries were using cruising lifeboats that would remain at sea for long periods, and the RLI developed that idea as well, and they built 3 of these type of craft that would have a crew of 6 and remain at sea for several days on end. These were built in Glasgow, so this boat was called the Clyde class. Yes, you can see them on the pattern before. Absolutely, yeah. So this was the D class. These are not named after UK rivers. The RLI were looking to speed up their fleet because more and more people were taking to more of a leisure. By the time you launched an 8-knot conventional lifeboat down a slipway or over a beach over skids, the Lilo would be miles out to sea. So the French were using Zodiacs, and the RLI cottoned onto that idea, started developing the D class. That started off as the IRB, the Inshore Rescue Boat, and that then became the ILB, which, if you watch Saving Lives at Sea, they do most of the work on Saving Lives at Sea. And they do pretty much most of the rescues in the RLI, to be honest. They developed over the years. There used to be an age limit of 45 years old for a D class because of the pounding their knees would take in rough seas. This boat, Atlantic class, named after the Atlantic College on the west coast of the UK. After, I think his first name was Desmond Hoare, who was the Commodore of the college. They started developing an inflatable boat that put wooden aspects to the hull, and so it became the Atlantic class. Does anybody know the other unique fact about Atlantic College and the RLI? It was the first station to have a female helmsman, even back in the late 60s. So really train setting as far back as then. She was a Norwegian student who was studying at college. So helping to push the boat down the castle. So back to the Arun. As you know, Sir William Arnold was the second Arun to be built. The first Arun, 5201, was just called Arun. So that had gone around the coast of the UK, like the Waveney, on evaluation trials, and the volunteer crews around the coast loved it. She ended up at St Peter's Port. I don't know why they kept it at St Peter's Port. I think that's we like this one, we're not sending her back to the mainland. But she was a very unique lifeboat. Never built one of these. It was designed by RNI naval architects, but she had a very straight deck all the way along. So very much like a cruising type of boat of that era. Can anybody see the disadvantage of having a lifeboat such as that design?
Wet.
Sorry, it's what?
Wet.
Wet. Yeah, it would be wet. Yeah. What about recovering of survivors from the water?
Freeboard's quite high.
Absolutely. Very, very high freeboard, making recovery of survivors really difficult. So what did they do? Well, it's a colour picture of one. That's the real one. They cut away the hull. so it slides all the way down to the stern. You have a raised afterdeck, and that would be the area you collect your fibres from. And that then changed it went through, so that's the third Arran. That was slightly longer in length for the astute ones amongst you. That's 54, so they added an extra 2 feet. And they've got a couple of Arrans, 54 foot in length, with a rounded hull as well. And you see the flying bridge is now moved to the front, and the Y-class inflatable was kept on the roof of the warehouse. Then another design of the Arran, still going for that sweeping afterdeck. And if you look at modern day lifeboat now, such as the 7, they're still using that. So the 5202 was a real like prototype waterall train setter. So the 5201, the Arran, on her day of her naming ceremony in 1973, the people of Guernsey were fundraising for their new Arran class, which was already being built in Hampton. So the fundraising branch was led by the Vice President, who was also the Bailiff of Guernsey. Through here. That was a gentleman called Sir William Arnold. Sir William Arnold was a much respected bailiff and much loved. And he was due to retire on his 70th birthday. Sadly, he developed a short illness and died before he could reach his retirement. It was really, really sad. He had 2 sons. And I'm very pleased now that I'm in regular contact with his son, who came to visit the lifeboat last September for the first time. So we've got that nice connection. So the people of Guernsey raised about £50,000 towards the cost of the boat in 1973, which was about £130,000. It worked out about £1 per head of population, so a real good effort. I haven't got any photos, sadly, of the boat being built at Osborne's in Littlehampton, but this is one of the Arran being refitted and stripped back to basics on one of her got a 5-yearly refits. So you can see how the hull is put together. Triple laid plywood, cold moulded for extra rigidity. So she arrived on station at St Peterport in 1973, on the 6th of November. 3 days later, she was being called out to the dismasted yacht with Lord Trenchard, which belonged to the Joint Services Sailing Association. And Lord Trenchard was a former Met Police Commissioner. So it didn't take long for her to go out and get involved in the first job. So, lifeboat rescued 223 people over the 3 decades, for over 500 launches. Sadly, with anything connected with the sea, there will always be a tragedy. And the St Peterport suffered a tragedy early on in January 1974, when the Greek ship Prosperity was lost with all its 15 hands off the coast of Guernsey. It was actually split in 2, and the ship was carrying a whole load of timber. So it's a bit of a poignant, sad and happy story. Sadly, like I said, all the sailors lost their lives, and it was down to the lifeboat to recover all the bodies of the deceased. The timber that was lost was washed up on the shore, and there's great rumours that a lot of sheds were built in that year, and fences from all the timber that was recovered from the beach. Lady Arnold was heavily involved in the fundraising for a monument and memorial to the seaman that was lost. So in 1974, the lifeboat was named by the Duchess of Kent, and the current president of the RLA is the Duke of Kent. I'm pleased to say it's coming to St Catherine's Dock on the 10th of June to rename and dedicate my lifeboat. So put that diary in your dates. The more the welcome. It is a ticket-only event, but you will be able to be part of the proceedings and be able to see it because it's on the event platform in the central docks of St Catherine's. So 10th of June at midday. I'm pleased to see as many there as possible. This is the original programme from the naming ceremony back in 1974. And normally there's a little video that goes with that. Spring 1974, the RNLI had developed another class of lifeboat called the Thames class. Nothing to do with the River Thames. They want London didn't have a shipbuilding, so I don't know why they called it the Thames class. They run out of rivers at that particular moment in time. But it came over to Guernsey and did evaluation trials with the Arran, and they built 2 Thames classes. And I've heard it on good authority that the only reason why they didn't go with the programme of building Thames, the only reason why they didn't go through the programme of building Thames classes because the Arran outshone it by far. So yeah, it run all its trials, its handling, how the crew coped with the bad sea conditions, hands down. But a friend of mine has got the first Thames class rotary service, which served it down at Falmouth and at Dover, and he's restoring his lifeboat in Glasgow. So John Petty was the first coxswain of the Sir William Arnold. He won 4 bronze medals and 1 silver medal, and he won his first bronze medal under the stewardship of his father, who was the coxswain of the St Peterborough lifeboats. So he was a good master mariner already. He won his won his second bronze medal, but the first medal for the Sir William Arnold in July 1975, when the Point Law, a Shell BP combined tanker, ran aground off the coast of Alderney. Normally, the preferred access point for the lifeboat could be coming on the lee side. As you can see, so close to the rocks, that was an option that wasn't available. So when the lifeboat turned up, I'm making a meal out of this, but force 9. So pretty bad conditions. They turned up in darkness, they lit the air up with an August lamp and parachute flares, but nobody was actually in danger. So the lifeboat stood by through horrendous conditions all through the night. Daybreak, they could see what had happened, and the master of the Point Law decided he wanted 6 of his crew to be evacuated. So he put them into a life raft, no mean feat, and they launched the Y-class lifeboat from the Arran to go to the life raft and take them one at a time. So they looked for volunteers, and this lifeboat crewman called John Chick Rebillard stepped up to the challenge, and he set off with his 15 horsepower outboard to go to the life raft. On the first trip out to the life raft, the outboard stalled, and so they had to ship the outboard, and he did the rest of the journey rowing backwards and forwards. And he did that 4 times, and a Y-class is 10 foot long. So you can imagine you've got quite a big burly lifeboatman and 1 casualty having to paddle backwards and forwards in a force 8. Filling up with water all the time. The tanker, there wasn't major spillage, but there was a significant amount of oil, so it was quite slippery as well. He did that 4 times. There's a painting showing the rescue. And that's Chick with the fantastic moustache, handlebar moustache, with John Petty. And he got a bronze medal for his efforts, as did John Petty for that one. Next bronze medal was 1977. There was always been a 2-year gap between the boat getting a medal. Sorry, quite unique. This one was 1978. It's like when the cat's away, the mice play. Because whilst the Sir William Arnold was away being refitted, they had a temporary lifeboat. They had a 52-foot Barnett class wooden lifeboat. The Orion became loose from its tugs, and the Barnett class with John Petty as coxswain rescued the crew of the oil rig. And then when salvagemen went on a couple of days later, they needed taken off in a hurry, so they went back and recovered them again. So he won the silver medal for that rescue. Cantonade, 1979, force 9, gusting to force 11. It was a Greek ship. They went out to try and save, sent a mayday, and a nearby ship lost it from its radar, so it literally just disappeared in a matter of seconds. And sadly nobody was rescued from that. But that rescue or mission wasn't without its own drama. The lifeboats, not long leaving the harbour, St Petersburg, the life raft, which used to be kept on the foredeck, came loose from its fittings, so a couple of crew had to go out and stow it. As the door was open in the wheelhouse, a big wave broke on the lifeboat, filled the wheelhouse with water, so they carried on. A little while later, another big wave knocked the lifeboat on its side, knocked the coxswain and the radar operator out of their seats. Coxswain was knocked unconscious briefly as he hit his head on the fire extinguisher, and Chick Rebillard, as all happened to him, he was broke a couple of ribs for his efforts as well. So they carried on, they persevered, because that is the ethos of lifeboat volunteers. They would carry on and will always go out regardless. And that's them receiving their awards, not the RNI awards from the Greek embassy. So a lot of the time they will receive RNI gallantry awards, but also awards from the relevant countries that they serve the sea. See, the moustache has now grown into a full beard, if I realise. How am I doing for time? Please say if I'm over. So, Coxswain Mike Scales, he took over from John Petty when John Petty retired. He had quite an early, he took over in 1980, so quite a quiet year. But 1981 was all due to change. This is from a newspaper article from Guernsey Press. That radar scanner, display unit, was donated after a fundraising campaign by that lady who lost her husband in the 1979 Fastnet disaster. So the most famous rescue that this lifeboat was involved in was December 13, 1981. It was the Ecuadorian ship Bonita, which was on its way to the Congo from Hamburg, loaded with fertiliser. Out in the English Channel, some distance away from Guernsey, in a force 12 hurricane. Been hit by a number of big waves and started to develop a list, capsize to about 40, 50 degrees. Had 36 people on board, including a couple of females. The officers were Norwegian. It was a Norwegian, although it was an Ecuadorian registered vessel, a lot of the officers were Norwegian because it was a Norwegian company that owned it. And you can see the conditions that this boat was suffering. And if I get time, it is on this slideshow. There is a little 15-minute video which I'd love to show you if we've got time. That's what the lifeboat crew were met with when they turned up on scene, or when they turned up the position. It was lying on its side like a very injured whale, wallowing in the sea in the force 12. Normally this would play, I think it's down to. So what I'll do, if I may, right for time, I'll go online and just play that afterwards for time, or play it after dinner. It's entirely up to you. Kind of washed over this, excuse the pun, but the lifeboat made 50 attempts to go in and rescue 29 people, backwards and forwards. A few people started jumping into the sea, and the lifeboat would go in and try and grab them, and then back off. Remember, they had 460 horsepower times 2, with the power to go in and take them off. And after a while, they realised, the people on board the Bonita, the only way they could be rescued was by jumping into the sea, because they realised that the lifeboat crew would throw them a rope, hold on to it, and they'd pull them onto the lifeboat. But the 50 attempts the lifeboat were made. About halfway through, the coxswain Mike Scales gave his crew a respite because they were absolutely knackered. And so they backed off, and then they went in and finished the job. And they rescued 29 people in that way. The 4 people that had been rescued by helicopter, but the rest of the helicopters had to stop operating because those rotor blades were freezing up. It was so cold. So darkness, force 12 hurricane, seas 40 foot high, and a blizzard. What more do you want really for a Sunday afternoon in December? So these guys were heroes. All received medals. Mike Scales the gold medal, and the crew the bronze medals. That award ceremony in 1982 was also very poignant, because also at that ceremony was the mother of Joellen Richards, the coxswain of the Penny lifeboat. The Penny lifeboat was lost 6 days later after the Bonita rescue. Almost exactly the same conditions, but sadly they didn't come back. The Penny lifeboat had launched the Union Star, which was broken down, and the skipper had turned down the offer of a tow for a tug that was on its way to put it off of the rocks, and it was the finance involved in the tow and the salvage that persuaded him not to accept the tow. Really sad. And as a result of the Penlee disaster, the Coast Guard can now impose the condition that they will accept a tow. They don't want this to ever happen again. Gladly, I'm very pleased to say the Penlee lifeboat was a disaster. It was the last disaster to happen in the UK. So, that was 1981. 1984, described in similar conditions by Mike Scales Coxon, if not worse, they went out to the Radiant Med, another vessel which has got into difficulty. 9 of the crew, only 9 were rescued from the Radiant Med. They got into the lifeboat, managed to launch the lifeboat, and were picked up by the Sir William Arnold. And Mike recounts a story that he flew off a big wave, and as they landed on the trough, they were met by this huge thing that looked like a shark's fin. It was actually the upturned bow of the Radiant Med as it was sinking. So they had to throttle back slightly. But they rescued 9 out of their lifeboats. Sadly, one of the 10th person in the boat was dead, so they had to leave him. So they did rescue the 9. And that's recovering some of the crew. Little odd story, side story. Last January, I received an email from a gentleman called Parvis, and he lost his father. His father was an officer on the Radiant Med, and it was coming up to the anniversary of the Radiant Med, and somehow he got hold of my email and learned that I now own this William Arnold, and we're in quite regular contact now. So, and he's just passed his Master Mariner's ticket as well. So he's carried on in his father's footsteps, going to sea. And that's with some of the crew, mainly Filipinos and Indians. So that's the Matam 2, which was a yacht which was floundering in Force 8, the awards ceremony that I went along to. Again, another rescue involving the Y class. They wanted to try and get a tow to the yacht. So they threw a heaving line, which is, I'm sure you might know what a heaving line is, a light line with a monkey's fist, which would fly through the air. The casualty would grab it, and then attach a tow rope, a heavy tow rope, to the heaving line. What they didn't want to do was get it tied or wrapped purposely around the mast, but the person receiving the heaving line wrapped it around the mast. Consequently, it snapped. So they had to launch the Y class, this time with 3 crew in it. So you may have saw how small that boat is, and that must be quite a challenge. They went out to the Matam 2, attached another tow line, towed it off the rocks, and happy ending. So Peter Bisson won the bronze medal for that rescue. That's me up in the wheelhouse of the flying bridge at the award ceremony. The last medal-winning rescue was in 1992. Again, Peter Bisson was the coxswain. It was the yacht Sena Cioria, which was difficulties in the Force 9. 9 people on board. First 3 people were rescued, no problem. He went in, took them off. The next 3 were recovered. The final 3. After the mizzen mast of the yacht had collapsed on the lifeboat as they went in to recover the survivors, it took out to the lifeboat crew. The mizzen mast collapsed on the crew. Peter Bisson whacked it in the stern, got on the way, and now he had 2 crew down. So they had to be airlifted to hospital. So, quite tricky conditions for helicopters to do an airlift, which normally would take maybe 15 minutes. This took a whole hour to do the airlift. As they were taking one of the first crew up in the stretcher, the lifeboat rose on a huge wave, knocked to the stretcher, then it dropped into the trough again, which was leaving the winchman and the stretcher hanging in mid-air. As the lifeboat came up again on the trough, it knocked the winchman overboard, so he was hanging on by one arm, hanging on to the lifeboat. So quite some little escapade trying to get the crew off to hospital. In the end, the remaining crew of the Sena Cioria had to jump into the sea. and were picked up one at a time by the helicopter. Great painting, a great rescue. And that's one of the injured crew being taken off to hospital. So, I came along in October 2019, saw it up for sale. I thought, here's a chance of owning a piece of history. That's how she looked at it initially. Dark green hull, orange superstructure. Like I said, she had a lot of the metalwork removed, so I had to set about finding a fabricator to put all that back on. That was her actually being lifted out of the water. That was a task that was like facing me, trying to get all the barnacles off the prop and the prop shafts. So I hated barnacles, I was trying to get that off. And that was honestly being stripped back. So I was very proud of my work getting the barnacles off. So she was up at Blythe. We sailed her the 10 miles up to Amble, where she got lifted out, and the boatyard up at Amble were used to refitting 7-class lifeboats, so they had the lift to be able to get out of the water, get her into the shed, and start getting her dried out and getting her back to the original colours. That was the state of her weir house, or the rear of a weir house, and after deck. So I just kind of stripped it back to bare basics, so the blank canvas started getting back to how she would have looked in operational service. The main reason of buying her was I wanted to have a floating classroom for my school in Scaffold's Dock, but knowing of her history, I was very aware that there's no lifeboat in the UK where you can have access to all areas, and she has so many stories to tell. I wanted to make her a unique lifeboat museum, so that was really the main reason why I purchased it. So I wanted to get her back how she would have looked in operational life, so people can go on board and hear about her amazing history, really. So she was stripped back to undercoat. This was up in Amble, so I was in Essex during lockdown. No, sorry, this was before lockdown. And I was going up every other week, dropping up, doing a couple of days' work, and then coming back down to Essex. So every time I went up there, she was looking more and more like a lifeboat again. She was starting to get her character back. So she got the undercoat on, and then a bit of the gloss, and a bit of the red, really started to take shape again. So a local songwriter put the numbers on, and now she started to get, this old girl started to get her identity back, which was really good. So compare that to how she was when she came out of the water. I was toying with what was put on the stern of it. Do I put retired, some people put retired lifeboats, but no, I thought lifeboat experience. That's more catchy. That tells the story. That is our unique selling point. For Lifeboat 5202, which is a company which I set up to preserve this famous lifeboat. We're not a charity, it's a company that we do raise money for the RNLI through that. A couple of shots to the inside of the forward cabin, that again had to be stripped out. The chart table which they used when she was an independent lifeboat was a piece of 12-inch ply which went across. So that all came out, and the chart table is now my efforts and my carpentry. That was an IKEA table for the first part of the journey, from Amble down to Grimsby, but that wasn't going to stay in there for very long. Ryman office chairs, and now original Arran and lifeboat seats of that era, and the chart table back in its original position. And anybody identify that piece of equipment? Top of the picture. What about that one? That's the chart plotter, the very same chart plotter that the lifeboat was fitted with, the Dana 5000, and it actually works. So it's all monochrome, so there's no detail whatsoever. The top piece of equipment is a Decker Navigator, and it's the original Decker Navigator which was on that lifeboat. So presented to me by Carl, who's a current mechanic. So I've got the weir house is exactly how it would have looked in its operational life, near as I can be. Original engine controls. She's got 2 engines, twin Caterpillar engines, 460 horsepower each, and a fuel capacity of 2,500 litres, or 560 gallons in old money. So quite thirsty on the fuel. So when people say, Colin, why don't you do trips to the river? Well, that's why. If you pay my fuel, I'll give you trips. So, which is why I like to stick to the 12 knots, sedate, uses less fuel, etc. Use a local fabricator up in Blyth to do all my metal work to get it back to how we should look on the after deck, on the flying bridge, etc. Did a sterling job, and that's before we set off our journey south in February 2020. How are we doing for time? Any questions so far? Yes. Yeah.
What does it cost to keep it running, or in the state it's in at the moment?
She cost the region of 35,000 when I bought her. I probably spent that same amount of money, if not more, on restoring her. The actual upkeep doesn't really cost that much now. It's just the mooring cost, really. We've been in St Catherine's Dock for a year, and the idea was we were going to be in St Catherine's Dock as the UK's only floating lifeboat museum. But unfortunately, I bought it just before we had the lockdown and restrictions, so that's really knocked us in terms of the footfall coming through the docks, etc. So it's due to the expense of keeping us in Catherine's Dock, which is why I'm taking her back to Abridge Basin in the second week in June. Because when we were there longer than planned because of the lockdown restrictions. When we had open days, we had loads of visitors. So it worked there, so I'm taking her back to where she works. But basically it's the mooring costs, which is the worst. Yeah. Obviously, the more meters you have, they charge by the meter, as you know, boat owners amongst us.
So, where's Abridge Basin?
Abridge Basin in Essex, on the east coast.
Where did you?
Literally, it's West Mersey. So West Mersey is the closest lifeboat station to there. Yeah, near Malden. Yeah, so I'm from Malden.
I just wondered, all those lovely paintings, are they in a gallery?
They're on the boat. They're on the.
All those paintings?
Yep. Yeah. Some have been donated to me. Could I just play that? You know that's on the file, Neil's story. We can play that. Just finish out. There's the Castle Corner Museum in Guernsey that has some of the originals. But yeah, I've got the paintings on board the boat. So on your chairs, you might have found some brochures. We've got some tours coming up this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I do a 2-hour tour, guided tour of the boat. You can switch off the bits you've heard me talk about. You can actually go on board, listen to some videos, and enjoy the boat. So if you go online, or in the back of the brochure, there's a QR code. If you scan that with your phone, that will take you straight through to the booking page. And it's £10 for a 2-hour trip. Bargain.
USB key, right? It was on your USB key.
Yeah.
So where is it?
It's not in the West Basin, it's in Catherine's Dock at the moment.
So what time should we do that? Excuse me?
Yes.
What time did the tours go?
11 o'clock and 2 o'clock.
Okay.
On Saturday and Sunday. I've got spaces on both. So, I won't be offended if you say, I've already heard that bit. Just shut up. So, last little thing I'm just going to play.
What's the problem?
Is an account from the electrician, Niels Prospect. He was 24 at the time of the Benita rescue, and he wrote some memoirs from his account of the rescue, and it's really quite poignant. So if you listen to that, and then I'll finish up on Niels' account. Incidentally, on the naming ceremony, we've got Niels and John Acher, who was the engineer from Bonita who were rescued. They're coming over to the UK for the naming ceremony. And they'll meet up with Mike. It's the first time I've met him since 1981.
I'm Niels Fostreit. I was the electrician on the Ecuadorian vessel Bonita that sank in the English Channel on December 13, 1981. Our ship was on passage from Hamburg to Panama when at around 1 o'clock p.m. the first big wave hit us port side and made the vessel take a big list to the starboard side. After partially coming up again, a new wave hit us, and she didn't return upright. Then the third big wave sealed her fate. I went to the bridge and into the telegraph room to see if a mayday signal had been sent out, but it wasn't, and the telegraphist was nowhere to be seen. I'd earlier been shown how to operate the radio and send a distress message. This was picked up by the Danish ship Charlottenborg, which was nearby. The second engineer slipped on the wet deck and fell all the way down the deck and hit with both feet and broke them severely. Later we learned that he had 48 fractures and also had got one of the lungs out of position because of the hard blow from the impact. At the bridge, Captain Moran was very stressed and started screaming for someone who could find and bring his wife and their 2-year-old son up from his cabin. I went down in the darkness and found them there and brought them to the bridge. Seeing them made him calm and he restored his dignity as our captain. Helicopters from Cornwall arrived to us and managed to get 4 persons, including the captain's wife and his son, on board, before they had to leave us again due to icing on the rotor blades. We were radioed from Charlottenburg that they had been in contact with a rescue vessel which were on their way from St. Petersburg, Guernsey, and gave us the approximately time of arrival. That message was essential and gave us strength to carry on. They wanted everybody to move to main deck and come to the stern of the vessel. With the help from the chief engineer, we managed to get the second engineer up on my back. The chief engineer was behind me, pushing him up against my back so we could move him down the stairs to the main deck. On the main deck, the chief steward, Lieutenant Villacres, had slipped on the deck and fallen towards hatch number 3 and lay there crying for help. Villacres had broken the femur and his leg was in a terrible position, pointing away from his body. Unfortunately, there was no way to get down to them, and I also had a second engineer on my back. We managed to get the second engineer off my back and secure him to the rail. I knew where to find the rope, and I went for it and tied it to the rail and drew it down to the chief steward, who was frightened and reluctant to jump to the side where he could get hand grip and climb up to us. 2 times he threw away the rope because he didn't dare to jump. We told him that he had to jump, otherwise we would have to move on with a badly injured second engineer to the stern. This time he jumped, but lost his hand grip when the big wave hit him. He was knocked unconscious or dead when he hit the hatch entrance and was taken with another wave to the sea, where he hit against the vessel several times. This was a horrible situation to watch. People were crying and yelling around us. We talked to Villacres and explained to him that there was no way to get him up. But we also told him we would get helicopters to come back and rescue him. One can hardly imagine what it must have been like for him to be left alone in the darkness of a sinking ship. Later, we were told that wind speed was 50 to 60 knots, with waves at 10 to 15 meters, snow in the air, and sea temperature at 2 degrees Celsius. So we were all really cold. I had given away my jacket to the second engineer earlier because of his condition, so I only had my t-shirt, jeans, and a life jacket on. A little later, some helicopters, I think also from France, came back, but wind was so strong that they couldn't hoist down the rescuer, nor pick up Villa Cress, so they just hung in the air above us and lit up the scene with their lights, since it had started to become dark. Sir William Arnold arrived approximately 4:30 p.m. and immediately started to tell us on the VHF how to approach the stern and how they were going to drop lines to us so we could jump at their command in order to drag us away from the vessel and rescue us. Some of the crew did and jumped to the sea and got rescued, but some were afraid and threw the line back instead of passing it to next house. Some also tied the line to the rails, and this was a very dangerous situation for the crew on board Sir William Arnold and made rescuing very difficult for them. Sir William Arnold had already made several rounds towards the stern and rescued people away from the wreck and getting them safely on board, when they backed off and went some distance away and stopped there, and we thought something was wrong with their vessel. Later we learned that they did so to recover, as they were totally exhausted from the extremely difficult and dangerous task they were doing. After the rest, they commenced their heroic work to save our lives. During a run towards our stern, the engine suddenly stopped, probably because of too hard throttling, and they nearly crashed into us. But luckily, engine started again, and they reversed to safe distance. At one of the runs towards the stern, they got very close, and cabin man Jimmy took the chance and jumped to the rescue vessel. But he landed on his head and was badly injured and later died. When it was our turn to be rescued, at around 8 o'clock p.m., it was just me, Chief Engineer Eiche, Captain Moran, and the injured motorman Villa Cress left on board. I jumped the 15 meters to the sea together with the Chief Engineer, and I remember when landing, I shouted out, "Are you there, Chief?" And he replied, "Hell, yes." We were quickly towed to safe distance from the wreck, and the strong guys pulled us up and got us up on deck. A few hours later, Bonita sank into the deep. The Chief Engineer and I were sent to the cabin you are sat in now. The cabin had bunks, but they were all occupied, and there were no blankets left. We stripped off our wet clothes and lay down on the floor, which probably was about the engine room, because we could feel some warmness coming up. And at that time we were really freezing a lot, so it helped. The movement of the vessel was really strong when we started going to Brixham at the highest possible speed. The people in the bunks began to get seasick and they started to puke. They obviously didn't want to do this in their bunks, so they turned their heads over the side, and the Chief Engineer and I got it all over us. But you know what? It was like the best feeling we ever had, with the warmness of the continent splashing over us. When arriving to the hospital in Brixham a few hours later, my body temperature was below 32 degrees Celsius. After medical examination, I was wrapped up in foil with a blanket over me and given warm tea. And slowly my body temperature returned back to normal. Like a miracle, I was not injured, just totally exhausted and battered. I was 27 years old, and probably at the peak of my physical and psychological strength. So I guess because of that, I managed to recover and have a normal life afterwards. I'm glad I could take part in what happened that day in a way that makes me feel good to this very day. Also to this day, I still remember the feeling when I was safely on board Sir William Arnold and realized that I had survived this long horrendous day by very small margins. I also do remember saying to the two guys who pulled me up on deck, "Thank you so much for saving my life." And they replied, "That's our job." I owe my life to Mike Scales, Peter Bisson, Alan Martell, John Webster, Richard Harmon, Bob Voles, and Peter and John Bogart. They were the heroic and brave crew of Sir William Arnold. Their legacy from that day has so far given me 40 extra years added to my life. God bless them, Yaren and Lai, and this amazing lifeboat.
And that's why I'm Sir William Arnold. So I'm going to leave it there. So thank you very much for listening and for your attention.
What an amazing story. Thank you for preserving a piece of history. I think we've run over, so I'm afraid, and we've had some questions, so I'm afraid we're going to have to move into the dining room for our fish pie and cheesecake. If after that we can then have some more questions for those who've got burning issues they wanted to ask. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.